So hello and welcome to our webinar on winning mHealth funding and creating successful international collaborations. I'm Müller from the University of Southampton, and I'm also secretary of the mHealth Special Interest Group, who work tirelessly to get this webinar going. Let me just give you like a short introduction of how the whole webinar works. So we will have two very amazing speakers today, and I will introduce them in a second. They will give you a presentation, and then at the end of both talks, we will also answer some questions or in the middle, and that will basically depend on how many questions you have. So we might have a few questions after the first presentation or after the second, a few more, we shall see. So there are a few housekeeping rules, and they're very simple. So I said you can ask questions when you click on Q&A on the bottom of your Zoom screen, of the webinar screen. You can also chat, and this is at the same area, sort of where there's written chat at the bottom of your screen. You can just click on it and write something in there. And after the presentation, as I said, we will look at some questions, and we might not be able to cover all questions if there are a lot, but we try to make sure that a few questions will be given to the speakers. And also, if you have a question to a particular speaker, make sure you indicate for whom this question is. So as a final point before we will really start off with the webinar, we will record the whole webinar. So if you want to listen to it later, you want to share it with somebody, there will be a link available in a short while. So let's get straight to the webinar. Our first speaker will be Professor Sonia Lippke. She's a professor of health psychology and behavioral medicine and the head of the health psychology and behavioral medicine unit at the Jacobs University Bremen in Germany. She has successfully developed, implemented, and evaluated various web-based behavior change interventions in a number of countries and populations. And she has also secured funding for a great number of projects, so that makes her obviously very relevant. And once Sonia is finished, we have a second speaker. I will introduce her briefly now and later on as well. So our second speaker is Professor Lucy Yardley. She's a professor of health psychology at the Nuffield Center of Primary Care Research and Health Sciences at Oxford University. And she's also a professor at the Center for Clinical and Community Applications of Health Psychology at the University of Southampton here in the UK. Her expertise is in the area of digital behavioral health, where she has developed a person-based approach to developing interventions. She has published widely in the area of digital behavioral health, and she has successfully secured many large grants totaling over £60 million. So without further ado, I would open the floor for Professor Sonia Lippke from Jacobs University in Germany.
All right, thank you very much. So it's actually my first time doing this kind of webinar, so this is pretty new to me, and especially that I don't see my audience, but as it is with mHealth, there's always a first time, so I was very much interested in doing this with you. But I would also like to do this in a kind of interactive manner, although I probably do not get your answers. But I will not only give you some input on mHealth, but also on winning funding and successfully creating these international collaborations. But I would also like you to think yourself about these two questions. So did you do research on mHealth before? And why are you interested in this topic? So it's important that you get aware of it. And I would like to ask everyone who's listening now, take a sheet of paper and just briefly write down some keywords, because we will come back to this later. I was actually considering doing this in a kind of interactive tool where I could see some of your feedback, but anyways, today we do it in a more lecture-wise way. All right, so when everyone is done, I continue. And just to give you one example of my expertise, I published a paper 2 years ago on a computerized lifestyle application. Although it was no app at that time when we did this, it was published 2 years ago, and it was quite timely. And it raises the question, what is actually E and mHealth? So, as I said, when we conducted the study, there were very few mobile devices out there. But nowadays, we call E and mHealth devices exchangeably with iHealth or internet health applications, or D-health for digital health. So whenever you see a call for, so any kind of call for submitting a paper or submitting a grant application, this all falls into the same area, but there are more keywords like computer, online, internet, and web-based interventions, but also ICT, and especially if it comes to medicine and health. And of course, the virtual interactive interventions count as E and mHealth devices.
Sonia, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
I think you're not sharing the screen. Is it?
I did it. So, do you see it now?
Yes, now I have it here. Yeah.
Okay, sorry guys. So I talked about these. Now you see the questions again, and I just introduced the paper, and I summarized which keywords actually are belonging to E and mHealth. So is it now okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. So the question for this webinar was actually how to get funding in. And this requires typically that you are successful with applying for a grant. And this typically requires different steps, like understanding the call for applicants. So if you think European calls, they are not very long, but you have to understand them quite properly. So they have some keywords, some buzzwords. You need to understand those, and it's sometimes good to talk to some experts who had some funding in that area before. And then you, of course, have to match this with your own expertise. So ideally, you have much expertise in this area, and then you know very well what was done before, and where are still the open questions, and maybe you have some own ideas how to address these questions with innovative ideas. However, maybe you're just interested in that, and that's why I had this question to you guys before. So why are you interested in this topic? Maybe you just think that this is a very interesting field and you would like to know more about it. Maybe you have some own experiences with developing those tools because someone said you should do it, or that you were in a group which investigated that, but you were more interested in some other topics like mental health, whatever. Then you have to get in contact with other people who have this expertise. And then they can help you with aggregating the expertise within the group, but also coming up with some innovative ideas. Of course, in addition to that, it's important to do some appropriate writing and communication. So writing typically means that you write the application as it should be. And in addition to that, that the communication with all the partners involved in this project or with the grant should be done in an effective way, so that everyone can contribute appropriately and that you work together even before you get the funding, because that actually ensures that you will be successful with the grant application. And in addition to that, you should have some previous knowledge or experience with research and development, and you should be aware of the findings and theory. So you should know about the state of the art, and it's not possible to know everything. That's why you should again connect to other people, not just in terms of what they have done before, but also what they do and what they teach, for example, or in which areas they work. So examples of previous findings and theories regard, for example, socioeconomic situation of potential recipients of our interventions. But of course also the physical context, cultural context, so especially if you think about European funding, then it always comes as a question whether we could do these developments and evaluations within different countries or across countries. And then, of course, we should be aware of the cultural differences, but also what the different countries share. And in addition to that, social networks and social capital. So these all play a role. And of course, also the health system. So the social security system on the one side, but the health system on the other side. And this is not only important to have this as a background or an area where you actually investigate your research or where you develop special devices, but it's also important to know about this because this opens further options for funding. So funding does not only have to come from agencies or big institutions like the European Union, but it can also come from the health system directly. So, for example, if you think about health insurances or social security parties or some companies that work in that area, it's always good to know about all these to actually apply for funding or to have an idea where to look for calls and to get some funding from those. But of course, it's also important to know about the background and the previous evidences. And for that, you should do some reading. And here, just one example on the evidence on how to tailor interventions and that the tailored ones work better. This stems from a meta-analysis. So generally, meta-analysis are always helpful for not reading thousands of papers, but just the aggregation of those papers. But in addition to the main evidence, you should be aware of potential theories. So here are different types of theories, and this is a kind of overarching theory where we have explanatory theories, but also change theories, and that those work interactively together. And I brought you some examples for such theories, which are under these terms. But in general, characteristics of useful theories are that they have some assumptions about behavior, health problems, target population, environments. And typically you find that with the calls as well, so that the call actually informs about the specific behaviors or the specific health problems. Like if you have an aging sample which needs to improve the well-being and how to manage chronic diseases like diabetes, then you should know about that and consider whether there are actual theories that apply to these samples and concepts or problems. Good theories in general are logical, testable, and of course evidence-based, so that circles back to the actual evidences from studies and from research. But of course, there are also these larger studies and frameworks which come together. So if you think about evaluation, here you see that it's not only about outcome evaluations in terms of health, but even if people do not actually increase their health in an objective way, they might improve their quality of life. So this is important to consider, because sometimes you should really try to think out of the box and think about potential mediators like behavior, lifestyle, but also environment. And I think environment is not just the built environment, but it's also interacting with E&M health potentially. And there actually lies the innovative potential. In general, we distinguish in health psychology between these continuum models, but also the stage models. So just being aware of those, the different models or groups of models, helps to choose the right one, or to choose which merged models, probably hybrid models, which they could find innovative in a sense to increase the chances for actually getting money. Okay, coming back to the question, how do we apply successfully? So criteria to consider are that people should be willing to use those devices. So only if we come up with E&M health devices that increase the motivation of the recipient to use it, to pay for it, or to at least contribute a bit, and that in the end also increases the satisfaction and the behavior that is needed here. These E&M health devices should be useful, readable, and easy to use, and of course they should be manageable in terms of easy to navigate. But we should also consider privacy and the reliability of our research and our development strategies here. Of course, we should also try to think about communication, not just between the device and the individual, but also, or in addition, to provide chances to increase the social support, or to make use of all those social networks that are out there already. I always have the feeling like there is so much out in the field, but we with the research lag behind, and it's rather difficult to follow up on it. But if you look at the calls on the European level, they typically assume that you are aware of what's going on in the field. And of course, personalization should be considered as a option for tailoring our devices. Okay, coming back to how can we win funding, or how can we actually increase our chances? So we should try to understand the call appropriately in terms of really going into what is between the lines, or what does the agency actually intended with this call. Then you should match your own expertise with the call, get in more expertise if needed, try to bring in the innovative ideas and whatever I said before. But in addition to that, and that's why I put this into red here, you need to add good management to that and to create successful international collaborations, and to use these resources effectively, and, for example, to use those E&M health devices for also coaching options to actually increase the chances with the application. Okay, and how to actually get in contact with other people, or how to, if you do not intend to do the coordination, how do you want to get others being aware of your own expertise? I can only answer this with publish papers, try to connect to other people, get visible online, and of course in social networks. So I would not say always Twitter. Whatever you found, be a little bit more selective, but make sure that people actually see you and your expertise. And then it's important to not only for the grant application, but also for later on doing the research and the developments. But in addition to that, of course, to do and to conduct the dissemination and further applications later on. So yeah, in general, your expertise and your interests should fit with that. And we targeted these different topics now. I just would like to give you some examples of my own applications. So I did these applications on the European level, but I also have very good experiences with companies and organizations like health insurances who fund the research and to actually use it later on. So my experience with pure research projects is that in the end, you finish up the project and then it's not really clear whether it translates into practice. If you are interested in working together with companies and organizations, then you can actually also ensure that your developments get translated into practice and that they will make sure that you develop something over the time of the project that is of relevance for them. And of course, it's also possible to look at the national level. So I can only say something about Germany, the US, and a little bit about Canada, and whatever I heard from colleagues from other European countries. But I'm not an expert on that. I'm more looking into the national level because that in the end pays more. So really do some good research beforehand where you could find calls and then connect to other people who could help. And ideally, you also have some experts at your work sites or at the university who do not have a clue about the content, but how to apply in general. That's from my side. So now I would be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. So I guess we all realize there's quite a bit of work involved into like successful grant applications, especially on the side of collaboration and finding the right expertise. Yeah, this time I'm not showing my camera here, which is something I also learned, so that's also my first webinar. But a question that came up in my mind was, so what sort of role should the mHealth or the technology components play in grant applications? Because we might be very fired up about the technology, but what would you suggest, like what way or what emphasis should be on the technology side of things?
Well, generally, I would always recommend that you test your own research and findings, whether this could apply to your own life. And if you can use those devices and developments for actually easing your life or also helping your well-being, and with that, helping to communicate, that is always of help. And I would really recommend, so if you think about devices like Skype or something that is very easy to use, do it. And maybe then you get some innovative ideas for these grant applications as well.
Okay, great. Before we go into other questions, as a quick reminder, you can ask questions at the bottom of your screen under Q&A. We will have another Q&A session after the second presentation. So I will now introduce Professor Lucy Yardley from Oxford University and from Southampton University, who will go into her, or who will present insights from her own experience on mHealth funding and international collaborations.
Great. Thanks very much, Andre. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Sorry. I have never done a webinar before. I think I expected to hear people back. Okay. I haven't got a huge number of slides because I was hoping that this could be quite interactive, and so I'm really hoping that as I put each topic up, you send type out, if you don't want to do it live, type out the question that you have on that topic, and then we can discuss that after I've got to the end of my slides. So I've just got one slide per topic for 4 topics, and then hopefully we can go into your questions if you've sent them. So these were questions that Andre had set us actually when he invited us to take part in this webinar. And the first one was, where can we find E and mHealth grant funding opportunities? Now, I'm afraid I can only speak from my own experience. I've been work package leader on 3 EC funded grants, but all of my other grant funding has been from the UK. So apart from the limited EC funding experience, I can talk about the UK, but I'm sure that many of you have equivalent organisations in your own countries. So there are actually lots and lots of good funding sources for E and mHealth grants. So firstly, there will be scientific funding research boards in the UK. These are the Economic and Social Research Council and funders of social science research, and you'll have ones in your own countries, I'm sure. And what you can talk about for funding applications for those funders is how you can use E and mHealth grants to develop and test behavioural science methods and also theories. So, of course, using E and mHealth, we can get instant data, very detailed data from many, many individuals, much more extensive data than we ever had previously, and that can allow us to test behavioural theories in a way that we haven't before and develop new methods of testing them. So there's plenty of scope there for sort of proper basic science in behavioural science and social science. And there are funders that are interested in that aspect. Then there's a whole load of funders that are interested in funding new technologies. And in my experience, that's mainly the EC, but also in the UK, the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. But as Sonia said, there's also companies that are interested in new technologies. And for that kind of thing, you need to make the technology more of the real focus of the study. So you need then really innovative technology. These funders aren't interested in just creating another app or another website. They really want to be doing cutting edge technology, pushing the boundaries of software and hardware. And then thirdly, this is where I get probably most of my funding from, though I've had funding from all of these sources, but I find for my research, the clinical research funders, the people that want you to develop, trial and implement healthcare interventions, have funded lots and lots of E and mHealth research, because they can see that obviously that is the future in terms of efficiency, low cost per person, innovation, and so on. So the EC certainly funds plenty of this kind of research. In the UK, the Medical Research Council and the National Institute for Health Research are the main funders. But also lots of charities. So, you know, Asthma UK, Diabetes UK, Arthritis UK, and there'll be lots of equivalent organisations, I'm sure, that you know of. So we are actually very lucky, I think. We have lots and lots of different kinds of funders, but the main thing to be aware of is that they'll have different agendas and different interests, and that the way that you need to design and present your study will be very different for these different funding sources. So that's that question. Hopefully you're all firing off lots of typed questions that I didn't cover in that. Moving on to Andre's second topic. What does a strong mHealth related grant application need? And secondly, how important is innovation to funders? Now, I think Sonia gave you a very full answer to the first part of this question. So I won't answer that so much, apart from to say that people have different strategies for getting research funding, and some people fire off applications to all the calls that come out. And I don't tend to do that because I hate rejection, and so I wait until I think there's a really, really good chance of success and I've had plenty of time to fine-tune my application and get just the right team together and so on. So I often actually go for researcher-led opportunities so that I can come up with my own one, or only go for calls that really closely match what I do. And part of the reason for that is that, from my experience on sitting on quite a lot of research funding boards by now, I would say to you that one of the main reasons that proposals don't get funded is because they are very good, but they're not absolutely the best. And so really, particularly by the time you get to putting in a full application, you will be up against lots and lots of people with good ideas, good teams, good track record, good experience of the area. And there has to be something about your proposal that will make it better than all of those. So it just has to be the best team and the most innovative idea, and I would also say the most fully worked out proposal. So you have to kind of live through everything that's going to happen during your project, anticipate every risk and problem, and put into the grant how you were going to solve all of these potential problems and barriers and solutions. So you have to be the harshest critic of your own proposal. Now, one of the good ways that I've found is to make sure that your proposal reaches that point of excellence is to have collaborators who are very high quality. And the first time that I collaborated with people like that, I thought, well, if this is what my collaborators say about my draft proposal, I can't imagine what the reviewers, the critical reviewers, will say. But of course, actually, it worked the other way around. It was that my collaborators were so critical of everything that I wrote that by the time it reached the reviewers, we'd already anticipated most of their criticisms and answered them in the proposal. So really find the most critical collaborators you possibly can, and they're good ones for making sure that your proposal is really, really good before it goes in. Okay, so aiming for absolutely outstanding excellence in every detail is what I would say for the first part of what you need. And that means never repeat yourself. Every word you're allowed in the proposal should be making another bit of the argument. Now on to innovation versus real-world impact. What I would say from my experience of research funding boards is that actually they tend not to like risk. And innovation is often risk, especially if you're a more early career person. And they want to be fairly sure if they're spending hundreds of thousands or millions of euros that they're going to get worthwhile research from that. So however much they may say that they want innovation, they actually want to be sure that the innovation won't be risky. So how can you reduce their perceptions that your innovation might be risky? Well, previous success is very persuasive. So, for example, when critics say, we're not sure if this team is going to be able to recruit the sample size they need, if you've got people on the team who've had previous success of recruiting large samples, that really, really helps, because you can say, we know how to do it, we do it this way, and here's the published evidence that it works. So that's where having a team that has high impact publications can really work, because they are your evidence that you can do it, you've done it before. If it's a very innovative area, or you don't have anybody on the team for that with that kind of track record, then I would say very convincing pilot data. So as strong a feasibility study or pilot study as you possibly can have, again, published and peer-reviewed in all its detail as much as possible is a good idea. And again, the research funding boards are going to want evidence of productivity. So I've mentioned achieving large samples, but for example, that what you've promised before you can actually deliver. That will really help them. But in terms of innovation, I think we're very lucky in the field of mHealth, because we're using new technology, and that is constantly offering us ways to deliver things that maybe already have an evidence base from the past, but in new ways. So we can offer new benefits in that way, and quite often cost effectiveness benefits. But another way that one can be innovative, but also link that to real world impact, is to identify a timely need that there hasn't been before. So, for example, everybody's aware that the ageing population is creating healthcare needs and costs that are very difficult to meet. So if you can argue that you're trying to address that problem, then that will increase the perceived real world impact. Because I think in these days, research funding boards are very much looking for real world impact, not just scientific novelty and innovation. And as Sonia said, a very good way to show that you're going to have real world impact is to be working in partnership with people that are going to help you disseminate your work and make it a product that can really be rolled out in the real world. And the EC really likes that. I can come back to that. Okay, moving on to the next topic. How to develop international collaborations and strong networks, how to decide when to collaborate and when not. Well, in our field in particular, but I think in every field these days, I would say you always want to collaborate. It's absolutely inconceivable that you will have all of the needed expertise and skills and experience within your team. Here at LifeGuide, we actually have a really large team now with a huge range of skills and quite a lot of experience. Nevertheless, every single proposal we put in has lots of people, not just from across our team, but outside our team, in different disciplines. So, in healthcare, in computer science, in health economics, social science, human-computer interaction. There are so many relevant disciplines. But as I was saying, that there'll be always people with different experience. So, for example, we've developed our interventions and trialed them in European countries, but we've never done it in other countries. And so where I'm looking now to sort of maybe try it out in other countries, I'm seeking partners who have experience in those other countries. I've mentioned before that just people that have a different perspective from you and can critique what you're doing from a different perspective are really important. So finding the right collaborators, think about what skills you don't have and that you really need that are complementary to your teams. If you're early career, you may want people with more experience than you and a good record of past success that you can refer to in your proposal. Now you may think, how am I going to get somebody that already has a good record to collaborate with me? And the answer is that often people that have this good track record actually have a lot of research already and haven't got a lot of time to write grant proposals. So you might have a really good idea, you might have more time than them, you may well have more expertise than them in one particular area of mHealth, and you can offer all of that to them in return for their experience of writing grant proposals, their critical ability, and their track record as a senior member of their team that they can share with you and reassure the funders with. And in case that sounds like an invitation to you to collaborate with me, I have to say that I am turning down most people at the moment simply because I have too many collaborations. But there will be many, many other people out there that you will be able to successfully offer these things to. In the past, there have been times when I've been very glad when people come to me with that kind of an offer. And finally, there are very specific differences between the different funding panels. And therefore, I would advise that you get somebody on your proposal that has experience securing funding from the panel that you're going to be applying to. And maybe they're even on the panel. Now that sounds, people always think, oh, people on the panel, they're all friends and they'll give money to each other, which sadly is not the case at all. And I can say that from being on many panels. But what does happen is if you're on a panel, you get to hear all the conversations about different grants and know why they were turned down, so that you can see in a proposal, oh, there was a funding proposal that was like that and it got turned down for this reason, and so you can address that. So it is very helpful, people that are experienced with a particular funding panel from that point of view. And finally, lessons learnt when applying for these grants. I have to say that my experience with EC grants is that I don't really understand them very well. And I know there are some people that know how to get them. And again, I'm not suggesting any underhand thing at all. It's just that there are many European people that have a better understanding of EC funding. I've got much more experience of UK funding, and so I'm more expert on that. And so, for example, I would never try to lead an EC grant because I know that I personally I don't really quite understand what the process is that is really important. My feeling is that I have to say that the reviewing can be very variable in quality, and I think I know why that is, because to review EC grants, certainly in the past, you have to go and be locked up in a room with all the other reviewers for a week, and there aren't many people that can spare that amount of time, and so I think you end up with probably quite atypical people who have a week spare to go and do it, and often aren't expert in the field that they're reviewing. So I have to say from my own experience that I find getting EC funding more of a lottery than some of the other funding boards. However, what I have learned is that it does seem to be helpful to have very strong industry or commercial partners. So people, institutions and commercial institutions like Philips or Weight Watchers that are really strong and really going to be able to roll out the intervention if it's successful. And I'm pretty sure that if you only tick a few of if it seems a bit of a squeeze to fit into the call and you don't tick all of the boxes, then I would not bother trying. I think Sonia mentioned this, that you really need to look at the call and think, what was their vision for the ideal proposal? So it's a bit like imagining what the model answer is for an exam question. What is their model proposal? And try and tick all of those boxes rather than thinking, oh, well, this thing that I would like to do could just about tick some of those boxes and therefore be eligible. I don't think that usually works. So that's as much as insight as I can have, I'm afraid, in EC funding. But what I would say for all funding is don't give up. Now, my Lifeguide research programme, which has now got, for just that programme alone, about 30 or 40 million pounds, I don't even know anymore, that got turned down by the first 2 funders that I applied to. And they were quite small grants. And then what happened was with the second grant funder, I was only asking for £150,000. And I thought it absolutely matched what they would be looking for. So when it got turned down, I did something which I hardly ever do. I actually rang them up and said, I'm really puzzled why it got turned down. Could you give me some feedback? Because I thought it would be perfect for you. So they asked me to say why I thought it would be perfect, so I just explained on the phone. And they said, oh, you're right, it would have been absolutely perfect for us. We just didn't get from the proposal that what it was that you were proposing. And actually the concept of Lifeguide I did find very difficult to explain to people because it's a platform rather than an intervention, and fun, the reviewers just weren't getting that because I hadn't explained it well enough. So that was invaluable, learning that. So then I put in for a grant of £750,000 to ESRC and got it, because by that time I'd learned that I needed to explain it much better. Again, some of our other major projects like Power, our weight management intervention, that was turned down the first time. Then we just got a small grant for it, and then we got a big grant to fund a big trial of it. So it's really an iterative process. It's not that you have this wonderful idea and you go off and you get a huge grant and off you go. You tend to start small, build up from that, build up your CV, build up your pilot study that then builds the proof, and keep going. If you think you've got a good idea, keep going. And the great thing is that way you don't have to waste anything, because all the work you put into developing the idea, you can then recycle it round until you get it funded. So people really hate, of course, getting the review and panel criticisms. It's the same as with articles, and you have to go through that whole grieving process like the wonderful Hitler YouTube videos. But once you've been through that grieving, instead of thinking stupid reviewers and panels, why did they turn it down when it was just what they wanted, you think, why did I not explain it better, and how can I explain it better next time? And actually, the funding panels that I've been on really want to fund good research, and we will have long discussions about how we can manage to feed back to people so that they can correct the flaws in their research and make it a better research project that we would be confident to fund. And that's genuinely what's gone on in every funding board that I've been. Some funding boards allow you to resubmit, which is much more helpful because then you can respond to their comments. Some don't, but at least you can learn from the comments what to anticipate from a completely different board, which happened in my case with Lifeguide. So yeah, do just listen to what people are saying and try and take it on board, and I'm sure you'll get there. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm trying to There you go.
Thank you for this. I'm back. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much for the insights. And you can imagine now we have about 50 people on the webinar who are now clapping, but you can't hear them. So just imagine there's a big round of applause now. And we also got some questions here, and you can still submit question either by clicking a Q&A or in the chat function here. And Sonia asked a question here, and she wondered, how do you find those people, or do the other people, collaborators, if they did not publish before, so maybe industry partners or whoever? So it's asking like for both of you. I mean, Sonia asked the question, so.
I mean, if they didn't publish before and they were academics, I wouldn't be looking for them, to be perfectly honest. They might be looking for me, and that's absolutely fine, but I wouldn't be looking for them. If it's like industry people and so on, certainly in the UK, there were lots of networks where you can meet people from industry. So I guess those networks are good places.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay. And that was a difficult question, I assume, because mostly we are looking probably for academics who have published, so we would normally find them. Okay, but there was an interesting second question Sonia asked, and I also had it here on my list. So what do you do if your application gets rejected, but you don't get any feedback on why it was rejected?
Well, I think I've answered that partly, haven't I? Because I didn't get any feedback on that life guide rejection, and I did actually just ring up, and then I got wonderful feedback. And actually, I would really, I shouldn't say this because as somebody on funding panels, obviously you don't want to be inundated by people ringing up. But actually, I think you do get really helpful feedback, and people, if you want to chat to people, I would really encourage you. If you can't understand the feedback you're getting, I would actually ring up and just ask if you could chat to anybody.
Okay, that's a very straightforward approach. That's great. Probably interesting for especially younger people. I mean, I would probably not dare to do that initially, but now I will do. I will really
sometimes the regulations won't allow, but nevertheless, you see, the person I talked to for Life Guide was the admin person, and although she couldn't disclose the actual discussions, she was able to sort of give me the feel for the board. So I think, you know, nobody's ever going to say, well, panel member so-and-so said this about your proposal, that isn't allowed. But, you know, there was a general feeling that so-and-so, you know, that they might well be able to give you that kind of feedback.
Okay. Okay. We have another question from the audience here from Hajar. Thanks a lot for the question. So Hajar wonders, how can we find the funders? So I'm aware of some funders like MRC or Health Foundation, but are there any lists or anything that people could access to see what funder matches the idea that I'm having?
Since you mentioned the MRC, you're in the UK, presumably. I mean, I'm not aware of any list. I would say that if you're in a department, the senior academic staff in your department will certainly know all of the sources, and there aren't as many of them as you might think. But there's the research councils. So if you look up the UK research councils, there'll be a list of all of them. There's the National Institute for Health Research, NIHR, and that has all different kinds of funding streams. And then if there's a particular health issue that you're interested in, just Google and see if there's a patient organisation such as Asthma UK or Arthritis UK, Diabetes UK. There's one for every health condition. So that's a way in to start. I would strongly advise hooking up with somebody a bit senior who can mentor you, because if you at the stage of not knowing what the grant bodies are, then there's probably a lot more about the grant funding process that you don't know that you'd really benefit from partnering with somebody a bit more senior, offering them all those things that I was saying. So I would say, you know, mid-level people who've got more experience but haven't got so many projects that they can't take on anymore are quite often good people to work with, more receptive to working with you.
Okay, I hope that answers the question. You can follow up the question, Haja, if you want to. But in the meantime, we had another question from Ricardo. Thanks for the question. Ricardo asks, how can we see all the projects that were submitted for a call, like those that were accepted and rejected? So this is probably sort of in terms of learning from other calls, from other projects. Is there any way to see that?
I doubt that you can see the rejected ones. I would imagine that would breach confidentiality, especially since, as I was saying, most people recycle their proposals. So, the successful ones are usually published. So, you know, if you go on the NIHR website, I think you will see all the published proposals. And I would strongly advise looking at them, because then you can see what a really excellent proposal looks like. And when you compare that with your own, you might think, oh, more needs to be done here.
Yeah. Okay, let me see. Yeah, there's one question that I also have here on my list. How do you get to those innovative ideas? So how to get these innovative ideas, how to make sure that they have also sort of a larger impact? So how would you frame that in a proposal? Because as you mentioned before, it's not only about being super innovative, but it's also about sort of showing evidence that this has an impact on a larger level.
Sonia, do you want to, or should I carry on?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Well, this is where I think we are really, really lucky in mHealth, because there's just such a clear match between the new possibilities of the technology and the pressing and new needs for healthcare. So there's just a really good match. We can say that we can do things in a new way, reaching more people more efficiently, and also gathering more data at the same time to understand what works and what doesn't. So I think the whole kind of argument around mHealth in terms of timeliness and need and real world impact is a really easy one to make, to be honest. I think the thing that I've encountered most in terms of that argument is to do with the balance between innovation and real world impact in terms of timescale. So the EC, in some of its calls, many of its calls, is very happy to have what you call blue skies research, which is research that is really quite exploratory, proof of concept of new technologies that are probably not going to be adopted for, you know, maybe 10 years at least. And the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council in the UK and the more sort of technology-focused funders are very happy with that kind of research. The more healthcare-focused funders will be concerned about real-world impact in a shorter timescale, and they will ask questions like, does everybody have a smartphone? So, for example, if I'm planning to do an intervention with older people, at the moment, I can't propose to deliver that just on smartphone, because to those kinds of funders, because people will say it won't reach half of the population. If I'm developing it for dissemination in 10 years' time, because we're looking at cutting edge technology, that's not an issue. If I'm, again, planning to disseminate to young people, smartphones are fine because all young people use them. So you just have to be a bit careful about matching your user needs to the technology use on various timescales.
Yeah. So it pretty much depends on the context you're in. As you said before, if you go to like different parts of the world where the technology might not be so advanced, and everybody just has a mobile phone, so proposing a smartphone intervention or a study wouldn't be really great, although it would be interesting scientifically, but it wouldn't have probably the impact that is desired.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just more comment. So my experience is that typically with those research projects, we as researchers develop something and then bring it out to the actual people. There is a big discrepancy between what we think that is helpful for the people and what the people actually will use. So we currently have a national project here and addressed 65 years old people and with mHealth technology. And they had a very difficult time actually adopting those devices. Not everyone, but a large fraction of the target group. And then we discovered maybe we should have had a co-creation approach in terms of getting the target group, stakeholders from this target group, into our development phase and making really sure that we address their needs and that we do not overburden them. And of course, to target their actual interests and resources. And maybe we just developed something that was more targeted to the age groups of the researchers. So in the end, it's really a question of how to develop those devices by co-creation. And that is one main issue. And only if we get a large outreach, then we can actually later on also convince the target group to use it further, to pay for it maybe, and to adopt these devices in their natural environment. And with that, typically it goes along with further funding, not just the development, but also if we use this in the healthcare system, it only pays off if you get into the boat at a very early stage. Stakeholders like, for example, the health insurances, if they see that there is an impact of the developments, they will ensure that they develop it later on into their different offers.
Okay, great.
There's another question.
Yeah, we have actually two more. The audience is now really excited, which is good. I will start the question that Arthur asked. So can either of you comment or give an examples on how the generation of the proposal works or the process? So for example, if there's an open call and you're not really answering a specific question or topic, so he's thinking about who generates the proposal. Is it the behavior scientists versus the tech experts? And like, how do you go along with that collaboration? When do you go certain steps, or when do you abandon it? And how easy is it for you to get input from the tech experts? And how early on should you get ideas from these people in the proposal writing process? That's a complex question.
Should I go first then, Sonia?
Yes, please.
Okay. You can go the idea generation can come from either side. And again, it comes down to which funder you're thinking of. So for the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council, the idea usually comes from the tech experts, although actually I have led one proposal of that kind, but that was for a call for a collaboration between EPSRC and the ESRC, the Social Science Research Council. But usually it would be led by the tech experts, and then they just come and say, okay, we think there's this really cool new thing we can do with tech, but we're not sure how to make it work for people. Can you do that bit? So that's a very good way of proceeding. But you can do it the other way around and go, okay, so this is a healthcare need, and this is what I think should be the technology solution. But then I go to the tech people and go, okay, can we work on whether it would be possible to find, you know, whether this technical solution is going to work. But certainly you want to be talking for any E or mHealth grant, you need to be working together right from the beginning of the proposal writing, not going at a later stage, unless it's really such a straightforward, simple use of technology. It's just another app with usual app functionality, in which case you can really just write that as, you know, we'll get a software company to develop the app. But I do completely agree with Sonia that it's much better to be working with all of your stakeholders right from the beginning. So sometimes that's, you know, patients or members of the community, but often the key stakeholders will also be commercial partners or policymakers or potential purchasers, meaning, you know, the healthcare purchasers and so on. Really, you want to be working with all of those people right from the beginning. They need to be part of the grant proposal, so that your idea is really going to tick the boxes for everybody involved, and that will be much more convincing to the funders as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. But generally, Lucy, I very much liked the part where you suggested to be your most critical reviewer yourself. That is great. I really love that. And also to have this understanding of your collaborators, because it's really not straightforward and easy. So you need to have a group which works together good and efficiently. But at the same time, how do you actually give feedback? And I experienced that it was a very easy working group, but in the end, no one really was critical to each other. And so there was no wonder why we got a rejection. But then I also experienced that in a group, people were so critical that we never actually submitted the grant proposal, because time went by and then we realized, no, this one is not ready. And so it's really not so easy to find the right level of communication here, or a critical communication. And this applies to these different disciplines as well, because my experience with the tech experts is also, it's like a different language. So you can speak very well English from both sides. Or if you think about your own home country, if I think of colleagues in Germany, and we both talk in German, there is no actual problem with the language. But it's like lost in translation. So we talk about the same topic, and it's very difficult to understand the other side. And it starts with very simple questions like, what do the different disciplines understand in terms of behavior and motivation? And I mean, for a psychologist, this is straightforward, but I experienced that we discussed days almost what we would define in terms, or how we would define, for example, health literacy. And you can spend a whole project on that. So if you start with that, and you first need to clarify all these topics, in the end, yeah, time is up, and then you may not submit the grant proposal to this call. And the other thing that I also experienced is that with technology, time is going by so fast. If I think back 10 years from now, it's like medieval. So some of the developments from that time, you can't show to anyone because it looks like you're really old-fashioned, and it's just 10 years ago. Okay. So it's really not straightforward, and my advice would just be don't start with too high expectations, because then probably you would never actually get started. Allow yourself also rejection once in a while.
Okay, that makes us all breathe a bit easy. I have, I think, one more question, and I believe that's the last question because we have like only 5 minutes. But let's get to it. Haja asked, how likely is it to get funding for qualitative research as opposed to quantitative research? Are funders, in particular UK Health Institute funders, more likely to fund research that measures impact quantitatively?
Okay, that sounds like one for me. If you mean the National Institute for Health Research, yes, they would definitely mainly be interested in quantitative measures of impact, because they're looking for hard evidence that something is going to benefit patients in terms of health outcomes. And although I'm a mixed methods researcher, great believer in qualitative methods, I don't think qualitative methods should be used to evaluate health outcomes of health interventions. So I'm with the NIHR there. That, however, every NIHR grant that I have is actually mixed methods. It has a qualitative component to it. The qualitative component is to help us understand better how and why the intervention did or did not help people. So I think that the answer is, if you're trying to get the qualitative bit funded through NIHR, you need to partner up with somebody that has, that they do only fund research that is going to have hard health outcomes in terms of patient benefit. There are other funders of qualitative research. In fact, there are qualitative questions that the NIHR will fund. It depends on the funding stream. So I'm aware of a really interesting qualitative project in mHealth looking at how people use the web, what information they look up, whether they take any notice of ratings of, you know, hospitals and so on. So that's a qualitative study to try and understand how people use health information on the web. That was funded by NIHR, I think, although not the clinical trials funding stream. And there are other, you know, Economic and Social Research Council and some of the charities will certainly fund qualitative projects that are aimed at understanding people's experiences and views, when that is the primary question and a really interesting question. But they wouldn't really fund a very applied mHealth qualitative study.
Thank you. Sonia, anything to add to that?
No, I think this mixed method approach is really important, especially in the development phase. And then I think it really depends also on the cause. So my experience is that the more applied funders, they do not care so much about quantitative evaluations. They just care about that it works and how it works. They do not worry so much, and they just want some proofs. But my experience is that they do not understand any of those more advanced analyses. So if you come with a regression analysis, they are completely overwhelmed. So that's why it's also the question, what do you define as quantitative versus qualitative? And sometimes qualitative research is totally sufficient. But then, in addition to that, you should always be prepared for also deliver some quantitative analyses. And yeah, so having some experts on that is also of help, definitely.
Thank you for that. Okay, so it's 1 minute before we said we want to close the seminar or the webinar. And so thank you so much for speaking to us, to the audience of almost 50 people. They enjoyed it greatly, I assume, I hope. Obviously, a great thank you to all of those who joined in and asked questions and participated. I hope you, or we all hope you took something out of it. As a final point, the recording will be available, and I believe you will get a link to the recording shortly. And with this, I would just say thank you very much and bye-bye.